Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Adam Friedland did an interview with Ritchie Torres, representative in the House from New York. He's kind of the Hakeem Jeffries sort of ilk of politicians, Democratic, sort of blue dog Democrat, very pro-Israel, and like progressive in some ways, but the support for Israel has pretty much overshadowed many of his other aspects of his record. Not that it's that great, but like with a lot of these guys, their support for Israel is so strong that, especially at a moment like this, where that is coming under more intense scrutiny than it ever has, it's starting to look weird, and very, very few people in the media are trying to break that down. Like, where does that support of Israel come from? What exactly is behind it? Why do you feel that way? In what case is it like a true emotional connection to Israel? How much of it is financial? You don't have a lot of people in the media asking that type of question right now. So that's essentially what this interview amounts to. And Adam Friedland tries to approach it from a pretty honest perspective. He's been doing these interviews. I think he's trying to figure out his style. You know, he came from like Cumtown and then the Adam Friedland Show with Nick Mullen. And so he comes from this background of just kind of like, you know, it's just filth, goofy comedy, not taking anything seriously, a little bit of a political edge to it, but just like, you know, more sardonic than anything. And now that he's on his own, he's trying to sort of forge his own identity with a little bit of that same sardonic aspect, but with something more earnest. I get the sense that he wants to be in the political world, do political interviews that are serious. And so you could tell he did that here, where he's trying to relate to Ritchie Torres in terms of his own upbringing, and talks about Richie's upbringing and in the Bronx and how it is even inspiring, and trying to figure out where the thread is that makes Richie so attached to Israel. Because Adam is somebody who grew up Jewish, and he grew up, you know, going through the programs that a lot of young Jewish kids do that are related to Israel, Zionism, pro-Israeli sentiment, tying that to your Jewish identity, etc. But there's also another aspect to this, which is these weird vacations that politicians take to Israel that seem to contextualize their support for it. And so they get into that a little bit here. They talk about his general position on it. And essentially what happens is Adam ends up getting pretty emotional about it. And so the interview takes a weird turn where it becomes more of Adam speaking from an emotional perspective about his experience being Jewish and his disappointment in Israel, and the fact that he grew up having Israel tied to his identity as a Jew, and now seeing that Israel is doing the thing that he was raised to know and to recognize what it is, which is a genocide and an ethnic cleansing, racial hatred. He is seeing all of that perpetuated and perpetrated by Israel on such a mass scale. And that's an emotional issue for him. So hearing him try to get that through to a guy like Ritchie Torres, who takes this moralistic stance on Israel, but purely from a political perspective, is quite interesting, because he's really just not able to take it in. Clearly, he's not going to just change his mind on the spot, but he doesn't even seem to have the facility, the ability to process what Adam is saying, and that it's an honest perspective. So let's listen to a couple clips here and then talk about what's happening here.
You know, I left Israel with an empathy for the unique security situation that Israel faces.
Did you visit the occupied territories while you were there?
I went into not Gaza, but I went into the Palestinian Ramallah. So.
Yeah, Ramallah.
Yeah.
And what did you see when you were there?
You know, we spoke to Palestinians who obviously have a much more critical view of Israel, and
that didn't resonate as much as, like, what was your takeaway from hearing?
Look,
you're hearing the mayor stay wrote his children have PTSD, and then this guy's like, Israel's screwing with me.
Well, look, I'm in favor of a two-state solution.
Sure.
If you have disagreements with the Israeli government, you should voice your criticism of the Israeli government, but there is no justification for intimidation or harassment against American Jews.
I'm telling you as a Jew right now, that we are receiving a lot more hate because of what the people with a flag that has a Jewish star on are doing to other people right now.
That might be
and I'm telling you, as a Jewish person, how painful it is for us to say, and it hurts my stomach to say this, and you're going to say, I disagree, that this is a genocide. And that hurts to say that a Jew could do that. It hurts because we grew up with learning about what hatred is. We grew up learning about this. And the same year the state of Israel was established, in 1948, the world saw the Holocaust, and they established standards for what a genocide is. It was the same year. And the world said that this shouldn't be a thing that happens.
You're proposing to undo an established state?
No, I know people that live there. I have family that live there.
I don't think that they should leave. What are you proposing?
I'm proposing a democracy. I'm proposing an extensive demographic study of what was taken and what was lost, extensive reparations for what that was taken, and a truth and reconciliation process where we can end this shit. What we're seeing right now is that members of the Israeli government are talking about clearing that shit out. And Trump, our president, is talking about putting a fucking jet ski museum there. And that's the reality right now.
That is the far right, yes.
It's
that's
the
a
far
view that
right?
I reject. So
what the far right? I'm talking about the government and the generals that are in charge of Israel.
The Ben-Gavirs, the Smoltrishes of the world, that's a view
They're
that I
the
reject.
cabinet.
Yes, and I reject them.
That's what Hamas is saying they want to do to Israel. Sir, I lived there when I was 18, and I grew up a Zionist. And we were told, and our whole community in this country is told, that we have to defend Israel and love Israel because it will stop at the Holocaust. It will stop another Holocaust from happening. And my dad was born in 1951. That was 6 years after these atrocities. His friends' parents, he knew these people that had been through this hell, these skeletons. And it terrified us. And the understanding in our community is that we have to defend Israel. But I lived there, and I went to a settlement at the end of my year there, and I looked down a hill at a Palestinian village, and I saw how they lived, and I turned back and I looked at the settlement and saw how they lived. And people live in a world where they're demeaned and dehumanized and surveilled constantly by people and this isn't in Gaza, by people in SWAT team outfits with semi-automatic weapons, and that's what the world is seeing. And you keep telling me that the problem is someone's getting yelled at a restaurant? I'm sorry.
You're conflating two different issues. So I don't understand.
Please. This feels like a stain on our history. And it feels like it's changed what being Jewish is. Because what being Jewish isn't Israel. Judaism has existed for 4,000 years. This is a country for 75 years. Why would the Israeli government, Hamas wants to eradicate the Jewish people and the Jewish state? Is that right?
That's what Hamas has said, yeah.
Okay, then why would they directly give Hamas money, literally bags of cash in suitcases through the Qataris, nearly, I think over $1 billion in cash during this last 17 years?
That's a fair point. It's a great question.
If one of those kids at Columbia wrote a $5 check to Hamas, you'd say send them to Gitmo for being a terrorist.
It's a fair point.
Does that make Benjamin Netanyahu a terrorist? He's supporting terror.
The United States, it seems to me, the United States and Israel could have shut off the spigot and did not do so. I don't know why, but that was a failure. There's no question. I mean, Hamas murdered thousands of people, so there's no...
So what does that mean?
That Hamas is a terrorist organization for murdering innocent children and civilians.
How many civilians have been killed in this war?
The war is a tragedy, but
90% of them have been.
But
90% of them have been civilians. They've killed journalists. They've killed journalists.
People have been killed in a war. It's been a tragedy.
They've killed people waiting for aid.
But you're suggesting that it is the policy of the Israeli government to murder civilians, and that's that is a notion that I reject.
Yeah, so this is interesting seeing this side of Adam, and he introduces this episode by saying, I got, maybe a little too emotional. The interview went off the rails, and I wasn't able to get it back on the rails. And that is kind of what happens. Adam ends up saying a lot about his personal experience as a Jew and trying to articulate his position on Israel. Ritchie Torres is just kind of rebuffing him and just sort of looking at him like he's crazy. And then at the end, it kind of just ends with Adam saying, like, well, this interview sucked. It's bizarre. You guys should watch it because it is an uncomfortable watch. But it's also like, it is interesting the things that he gets out of Ritchie here. He asks some very good questions. He makes some very good points. Adam does. I don't think he does the best job articulating himself. Obviously, he gets emotional. I understand that. I feel the same way, honestly, about this issue. I didn't grow up Jewish, but I did grow up around a lot of Jewish people and in a school system that exposed me to a lot of, information about the Holocaust and not so much stuff about Israel. I didn't really grow up hearing about that, but just like the rise of fascism in Germany and hatred against Jews, I didn't realize until my adult life that not everybody gets exposed to that same kind of education, and not everybody grows up around a lot of Jewish people. So I sort of get where he's coming from on that, where it's like, this is probably the fundamental thing that informs my anti-fascism, is, the Holocaust and the racist hatred against the Jews. And so to see such an inversion of that principle on such a grand scale and such a mass gaslighting over it, and just the brutality and the indifference with which people perpetrate that brutality is, I think, really breaking people's brains. And particularly with a guy like Ritchie Torres, you see that, where, he takes money from Israel. He talks about how he went there and he saw and I think this is key to what exactly makes it so that people are so susceptible to this pro-Israel propaganda as politicians when they take these trips, is he saw how close in proximity Israel is to its enemies and to people that want to kill them, or to Gaza. And so they give this impression on these trips to these politicians that Israel is like sort of, surrounded by enemies. And so that's what imparts very deeply within people that, Israeli security, Israel's right to defend itself, is of the utmost importance. And so I think that's key. And I'm sure that a lot of effort goes into instilling that impression in these politicians when they take these trips to Israel. And again, this is tied to the reason that Zohran Mamdani was pressured so hard about whether he would take a trip to Israel. It's a very key part of their propaganda. And obviously the way they orchestrate those trips is designed to create a sympathy in you, invoke certain feelings in you, and invoke an alienated feeling towards the Palestinians. And that's what Adam gets into a little bit, saying that, like, looking at how Palestinians were living in their camp and looking at how we were treating in our camp, being treated in our camp, it gave him some things that were hard to process, that I'm sure he wasn't able to process at the moment. But as life went on and he started to see and learn more, it changed his perspective. So it's interesting to hear somebody who grew up being exposed to this propaganda in a way that was tied to his own identity and his own self, being able to reject that propaganda with more clarity than somebody who just sees it more as an aspect of his career. And Ritchie even says that towards the end of this debate, that, like, this is not what people in the Bronx care about. So, I mean, this is a vociferous defender of Israel, but then, gets frustrated when that's the main thing that a person wants to talk to him about, even though earlier in the interview he brags about how, I like that being a politician in the House, you're operating on all these levels. You're operating on local politics, and you're also talking about international politics. And but then he doesn't want to actually talk about these international issues in any real depth. So Adam, said he felt kind of embarrassed by this interview. He felt embarrassed that he, let his emotions get the better of him, and maybe didn't conduct the interview as well as he possibly could have. But I think he also got some really important things out, and he got some really important things out of Ritchie Torres too. Like towards the end, what he says, he admits that Netanyahu and the government of Israel shouldn't be giving money to support Hamas, which is what they did. but then isn't able to go the extra step of saying, well, why would they do that? He says, well, it seems like America and Israel could have turned off the spigot and they chose not to, and that was a failure. It seems to me that that's a failure on your part to ask why. Why is that the case? And how does that play into what we've seen happen now? Because the attacks and the terror that has been perpetrated by Hamas, both on October 7th and before, is used as justification for completely asymmetrical warfare that is aimed, obviously, at the extermination of Palestinians, the removal of them from their land, and the ultimate occupation of that land. That's what they're doing now. And Richie Torres says, oh, well, that's the far right. Adam Friedland says, the far right is currently the government of Israel. And Ritchie Torres says, well, it's ridiculous for you to say that Israel's policy is murdering civilians. So when Hamas, kills thousands of people on October 7th, there's no hesitation and condemnation of that. That's obviously terror. It's obviously bad. But then when in reference to the hundreds of thousands of civilians that have been killed, or even the number that Ritchie Torres is more likely to favor, tens of thousands of civilians that have been killed, that as well, it's a tragedy, and war is a tragedy. So that's how the propaganda operates right there. It's on full display. It's dehumanization of Palestinians through the empowerment of a more militant and less peaceful leadership structure in Hamas, because Netanyahu and the government of Israel recognize that having a more terroristic and less secular enemy running Gaza is better for their ultimate goal of full eradication of Palestine and occupation of the land. That's what they want. And so they benefit from having enemies that can't be reasoned with. It's that simple. So I understand why Adam didn't take it that few steps further. It was an emotional moment for him. I don't hold that against him. But that's the only thing that I wish the conversation had gotten pushed to that point, because it got pushed quite far. But those extra 2 steps are the ones that a guy like, and that's when he would start calling it a conspiracy theory. But he admits that Netanyahu, gave money to them, but he's not willing to say that that is terrorism, or that even inadvertently Netanyahu caused this. And so that's a real analysis. You could even make a pro-Israel case from that standpoint. That's a real analysis of the policy. But this idea of on October 7th, a reset button was hit, and now anything that happens can only be viewed from the lens of this started on October 7th. And, a creep like Ritchie Torres is obviously impervious to seeing how convenient that is, because part of his career depends on him not seeing how convenient that is. So good on Adam here. I respect this. I think he's doing a good job with this show. I think, he could tighten it up a little bit, but at the same time, he's delivering something that nobody else on the public stage is delivering here. And it feels like this interview was an opportunity for him to say some things that he's been wanting to say for a long time. So big ups to him. And anyway, all right, so the last thing I'll mention is that there was this shooting that happened in Minneapolis, and it was on a Catholic school. The narrative right now, especially in right-wing media, has taken hold that this was some kind of left-wing shooter. And it seems that some breadcrumbs were deliberately left in his wake to that effect. Like something about Donald Trump written on a gun or something like that. But people going further down the rabbit hole are identifying pretty quickly that this guy seemed to be associated with some kind of online forum cult type of thing that is indoctrinating a lot of young kids into being shooters. And a few of the shooters that have made the news recently, it's crazy how often at this point it's we don't even really talk about it that much, but the few shooters that have made a splash, because there seemed to be some kind of weird political angle to it, have seemed to be affiliated with this group in the last year or two. So as some of these symbols that they use are common. There's some kind of Satanist angle to this, but I really think that's just contrarian, because Satanists don't tend to be religious. It's unclear how much of this ideology is ironic or meant to confuse people. It seems like a lot of it is meant to confuse people, and it's not as straightforward as the sort of Groyper type of violence that was happening maybe 5 to 10 years ago, although there's threads of that as well. But however these kids are getting indoctrinated, it seems to be like even more brain rotted than that. So that's just something to keep an eye on, and don't let people get away with saying that this was some kind of leftist shooter, because it wasn't. That kind of thing is not inconceivable, but it just doesn't really seem to happen. And especially these shootings that are attached to like weird cult like dog whistling and symbols and that sort of thing. It's always right-wing type violence. This guy was an anti-Semite talking about Zionist occupied government and goy slop and soy cucks and stuff like that. So this is right-wing, alt-right type of rhetoric. There's no two ways about it. So I'm sure more information about that will come up. But I'll try to link some of the information about that people are finding about where this guy actually comes from, because it'll be important to keep that out there. I don't think the news is going to report on it from that angle, because that is not how they have been reporting on most of these recent shootings that have happened, which allows for a lot more ambiguity.